December 19, 1944. Verdun, France. A cold room in a converted army barracks. The most powerful generals in the Allied command sat around a long wooden table. Maps covered every surface. Red arrows showed German attacks. Blue lines showed American positions. Nobody was smiling. 3 days earlier, the impossible had happened. The German army had launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest. Over 200,000 German soldiers with tanks and artillery had smashed into thin American lines. 4 divisions were being overrun, surrounded, destroyed. Allied intelligence had missed it completely. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody was ready, except one man. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, looked exhausted. He had spent 72 hours reading reports that kept getting worse. The Germans had punched a huge hole in the Allied front. They were driving west, fast, heading for the Meuse River, maybe even Antwerp. If they reached the coast, they could split the Allied armies in two, turn the tide of the entire war. One town was critical: Bastogne, a small Belgian town that nobody had heard of a week ago, but it sat at a road junction where 7 roads met. If the Germans took Bastogne, their tanks could move anywhere. The 101st Airborne Division had been rushed to the town and was now surrounded, cut off, running out of ammunition, running out of food, running out of time. Eisenhower looked around the table. Omar Bradley, Courtney Hodges, Jacob Devers, and at the far end George Patton, the general the Germans feared most, the general who caused Eisenhower the most headaches. Eisenhower spoke carefully. His voice was steady. "Gentlemen, the present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us, not disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this table." It was a command, not a suggestion. He could not allow panic, could not allow defeatism. The German army had come out of its defensive positions. That meant it was exposed, vulnerable. If the Allies responded quickly, they could turn this disaster into a victory, but they had to move fast. Then Eisenhower asked the critical question: how soon can someone attack north to relieve Bastogne? Silence. Every general in that room understood what he was really asking, not just who could help, but who could turn their entire army 90 degrees. In winter, in combat, through chaos, and attack before it was too late, the generals looked at their maps, calculated distances, supply lines, road networks, weather conditions, units already engaged in combat. It seemed impossible. Then Patton spoke. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours, 3 divisions in 72. The room froze. Every head turned. Some generals thought he was joking. Others thought he was grandstanding again, making promises he could not keep. 48 hours to disengage 3 divisions from active combat. Rotate an entire army 90 degrees. Move over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles through snow and ice. Launch a coordinated attack against hardened German positions. It was operationally impossible." Eisenhower leaned forward. His voice was quiet but firm. "George, this is no time for grandstanding. The 101st Airborne is surrounded. If they are overrun, it is a catastrophe. Militarily and for American morale. When you say December 22nd, do you mean that, or are you being optimistic?" Patton met his eyes, did not blink. "Ike, I have already done the planning. My staff has 3 contingency plans prepared. I anticipated this meeting before you called it. On December 22nd, my 4th Armored Division will attack north toward Bastogne. I stake my career on it." The other generals shifted in their seats. Already planned? For a German attack that surprised everyone? How? Eisenhower studied Patton for a long moment. He knew Patton's reputation, knew his tendency to exaggerate, his love of drama, but he also knew Patton's record. Every time George had been given room to maneuver, he delivered. The Germans feared him more than any other Allied commander. That was confirmed by captured intelligence documents. Eisenhower made his decision. "All right, George, you have got your chance. But understand this. If you cannot deliver, if those men in Bastogne are lost because you promised what you could not achieve, there will be consequences. No more second chances." Patton nodded once. "I will be there, Ike, count on it." The meeting ended. Generals filed out to their cars, orders would be drafted, units would be notified. But for Patton, the real work had already begun, because he had not lied. He really was ready to turn his entire army overnight. He had been preparing for this moment for 11 days. While everyone else was surprised by the German attack, Patton had been expecting it. To understand how Patton could make that promise, you have to go back to December 9, 1944, 10 days before the Verdun meeting, 3rd Army headquarters in Nancy, France. Colonel Oscar Koch walked into Patton's office carrying a stack of intelligence reports. Koch was Patton's G2, his chief intelligence officer, meticulous, detail-oriented, and deeply worried. Koch had been tracking German unit movements across the entire Western Front, and he had noticed something that nobody else seemed to care about. 15 German divisions had vanished. These were not small units. These were full-strength divisions, including several panzer divisions with hundreds of tanks. They had been pulled off the line and moved somewhere, but Allied intelligence could not find them. Supreme Headquarters had an explanation. The Germans were holding these divisions in reserve to respond to Allied breakthroughs, nothing to worry about. The war was almost over. Germany was beaten. Everyone knew it. Koch did not buy it. He had been studying German patterns for months. The Wehrmacht did not hold 15 divisions in reserve just to react. That was offensive strength, enough combat power to launch a major attack. Koch spread his maps across Patton's desk, pointed to the Ardennes forest, the thinly held sector where American divisions were spread across miles of front. "General, I believe the Germans are planning a major counteroffensive. The target is here, the Ardennes." Patton studied the maps while Koch laid out his case. The Ardennes was the weakest point in the Allied line. 4 American divisions holding a front that should have required 12. The terrain was difficult, heavily forested, narrow roads, nearly impossible to navigate in winter. That was exactly why Schief was not worried. The same terrain that made the Ardennes hard to defend also made it hard to attack. No sane commander would launch a major offensive through that terrain in December. But Koch reminded Patton of something: history. In 1940, the Germans had done exactly that. They attacked through the Ardennes and reached the English Channel in 6 weeks. It was the campaign that conquered France. The French had said it was impossible. The French were wrong. Koch had more evidence. German radio traffic had increased dramatically in the sector. Prisoner interrogations mentioned new units arriving. Local civilians reported unusual activity behind German lines, supplies being stockpiled, roads being improved. Patton asked Koch a direct question. "If you are right, when does the attack come?" Koch's answer was immediate. "Within the next 2 weeks, probably mid-December." Patton picked up the phone, called Omar Bradley, his immediate superior, laid out Koch's analysis in detail. Bradley listened but was not convinced. Chief Intelligence disagreed. The consensus was clear. Germany was finished. They did not have the strength for a major offensive. Bradley told Patton not to worry, focus on current operations. Patton hung up the phone, looked at Koch. said nothing for a long moment. Then he gave Koch an order: start planning. Over the next 10 days, Patton's staff worked in secret. They developed 3 complete contingency plans for responding to a German offensive in the Ardennes. Each plan was detailed down to the minute. Truck routes calculated, fuel supplies pre-positioned, artillery batteries designated for rapid redeployment, infantry units assigned specific roads and assembly points, medical facilities identified, supply dumps relocated. The plans covered every variable. If the German attack came from this direction, Third Army would execute Plan A. If from another direction, Plan B. If the situation required a different response, Plan C. Each plan had sub-plans, alternatives, backup routes, contingencies for weather, for enemy interference, for unexpected delays. Patton's staff thought their general had lost his mind. Third Army was engaged in offensive operations in the Saar region. They were pushing toward Germany, making progress. Why were they planning for a defensive emergency 100 miles to the north? But they were Patton's men. They knew their commander. If he wanted contingency plans, they would make the best contingency plans in military history. They worked around the clock, calculated fuel consumption for every vehicle, identified every bridge that could handle tank traffic, mapped every alternate route. On December 12, Patton held a meeting with his senior commanders: Major General John Milliken of Roman 3 Corps, Major General Walton Walker of Roman 20 Corps, Major General Manton Eddy of Roman 12 Corps. He told them to be ready to disengage on short notice, did not tell them why. Just told them to prepare. His commanders exchanged looks. Disengage from offensive operations. They were winning, but they followed orders, quietly alerted their subordinate units, positioned fuel and ammunition for rapid movement, identified which units could move first. By December 15, Third Army was the only major American force with contingency plans for the Ardennes. Every other unit in the Allied line was focused on their own sectors, confident the war would be over by Christmas, planning for offensive operations. Nobody was planning for a German attack. Nobody except Patton. 5:30 a.m., December 16, 1944. The German artillery opened up. Thousands of shells slammed into American positions along an 80-mile front. Then the infantry came. Then the tanks. 3 German armies, over 200,000 men, smashed into 4 American divisions. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 4-1. Units that had been in quiet sectors for rest suddenly found themselves fighting for survival. Communication lines were cut. Commanders lost contact with their troops. At chief headquarters, the first reports were dismissed as a local counterattack. It took hours for the scope of the disaster to become clear. This was not local. This was massive. The biggest German offensive since 1940. At Bradley's headquarters, disbelief, shock. This could not be happening. Allied intelligence had assured them the Germans were finished. The 106th Infantry Division, newly arrived and positioned in the Ardennes for a quiet introduction to combat, was virtually destroyed. 2 entire regiments surrendered. Over 7,000 men. The largest mass surrender of American troops in the European theater. Other units were surrounded. Cut off, fighting desperate battles just to survive. But at Third Army headquarters in Nancy, the reaction was different. Patton received the first reports at breakfast, read them carefully, summoned his staff immediately, looked at Oscar Koch. "You were right. What is their objective?" Koch studied the incoming reports, the pattern of attacks, the direction of German thrusts. Bastogne, they need the road junction, and then Antwerp. Patton nodded. called in his operations officer. "Get me General Gaffey. We are executing the contingency plans. Alert all corps commanders. I want movement orders ready within the hour." While every other American headquarters scrambled to understand what was happening, Patton was already giving orders. Third Army began disengaging from combat operations in the Saar. Not immediately, not all at once. That would create chaos, but methodically. According to the plans they had prepared, units currently in contact with the enemy maintained pressure, but reserves started moving. Supply convoys changed direction. Artillery batteries began displacing to new positions. The other generals would spend 3 days trying to figure out how to respond. Patton had figured it out 11 days ago. Now he was just executing. On December 18, Patton received the call to attend the emergency meeting at Verdun. Before he left, he gave his staff final instructions. "Continue preparations for northward movement. I expect approval at the meeting. Be ready to execute on my order." His chief of staff asked what order he should wait for. Patton smiled. "I will call and say 2 words, play ball." That brings us back to the Verdun meeting, to Patton's promise, to Eisenhower's authorization, and to what happened next. Patton left Verdun and went directly to his car, made one phone call to 3rd Army headquarters, spoke 2 words, play ball. Those 2 words activated contingency plans prepared 11 days earlier. Within minutes, orders flowed through 3rd Army's communication network. Every unit had been briefed. Every commander knew his role. The movement began immediately. The 4th Armored Division started moving north. The 26th Infantry Division followed. The 80th Infantry Division prepared to disengage and redeploy. Truck convoys that had been pre-positioned started loading troops. Artillery batteries displaced to new positions. Supply depots shifted from supporting offensive operations to supporting a relief attack. Over 133,000 vehicles began moving through snow and ice. Supply lines running east were redirected north. Units in combat that morning would be in combat again 100 miles away within days. Imagine what this meant. An entire army, over 100,000 men, thousands of tanks, trucks, artillery pieces. All moving simultaneously, all on narrow roads, in winter, through snow and ice, with German aircraft overhead, with refugees clogging the routes, with retreating American units moving the opposite direction. It should have been chaos, complete breakdown, gridlock, but it was not. Because Patton had planned for it. Every unit knew which road to use. Every convoy knew when to move. Military police were positioned at every critical intersection, directing traffic, keeping vehicles moving. Fuel trucks were staged along the routes. Mechanics were positioned to handle breakdowns. Medical units were ready for casualties. Nothing was left to chance. The movement began on the night of December 19 and continued without pause. The weather was brutal. Snow, ice, freezing temperatures, vehicles broke down constantly, men suffered frostbite. But the movement continued. Soldiers who had been fighting in the Saar climbed into trucks and rode north. Some slept sitting up. Most just stared out at the darkness, wondering what they were driving into. Officers rode in jeeps at the front of columns, checking maps by flashlight. Making sure units stayed en route, radios crackled with updates. 4th Armored lead elements passing through Luxembourg City. 26th Infantry crossing at Thionville. 80th Infantry disengaged, moving to assembly areas. The progress reports came in hour by hour. By December 21, lead elements of the 4th Armored Division were in position south of Bastogne. They had moved over 100 miles in less than 48 hours. through the worst winter weather in decades, while disengaging from combat operations. Military historians would later call it one of the greatest feats of logistics in modern warfare. But for the men doing it, it was just exhausting, cold, terrifying, and necessary. December 22, Third Army attacked north, exactly as Patton promised. The 4th Armored Division drove toward Bastogne. The 26th Infantry Division attacked on the left. The 80th Infantry Division on the right. The fighting was immediate and brutal. German forces had established defensive positions along every approach to Bastogne. They knew the Americans would try to relieve the town. They were ready. Tank battles erupted in frozen fields. American Shermans against German Panthers and Tigers. Infantry fought through forests and villages, house to house, room to room. The Germans fought hard. They had been told Bastogne was critical, that the offensive depended on holding it. They were not giving it up easily. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne held on. Barely. By December 22, they were down to their last ammunition. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Food was running out. On December 22, the Germans demanded their surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe sent back his famous one-word reply, "Nuts." The paratroopers were not surrendering. They knew Patton was coming. December 23, December 24, December 25. The fighting continued. Third Army pushed forward, mile by mile. The weather was terrible, visibility near zero. Aircraft could not fly, artillery was the only support, but Patton kept pushing, kept attacking. Told his commanders there was no time. The 101st was dying, every hour mattered. December 26, 4:50 p.m. First Lieutenant Charles Bulge, commanding the lead tank Cobra King, broke through the final German positions at Eisenhower, made contact with elements of the 101st Airborne. The siege was broken. Patton received the news minutes later, immediately called Eisenhower. "Ike, we are through to Bastogne." Eisenhower's reaction was emotional, relief, gratitude, disbelief. Patton had actually done it. Done what everyone thought was impossible, turned an entire army, moved it 100 miles through winter, launched a coordinated attack, and relieved Bastogne in exactly the time frame he promised. The corridor was narrow. German forces attacked the flanks continuously, but Third Army held. That night, supply convoys rolled into Bastogne, ammunition, food, medical supplies. The 101st Airborne had held for 8 days against overwhelming odds. Now they had what they needed to keep fighting. The Battle of the Bulge would continue for another month, but the German offensive was broken. Bastogne held. The Germans never reached the Meuse, never split the Allied armies. The tide had turned. The question everyone asked was how. How did Patton do it? How did he turn an entire army overnight? The answer was simple but profound. He did not do it overnight. He did it over 11 days. While everyone else dismissed the possibility of a German attack, Patton prepared for it. While everyone else was surprised, Patton was ready. Oscar Koch's intelligence analysis was proven correct. His prediction about the timing, the location, the objective, all correct. But intelligence alone was not enough. Other commanders received the same information. Bradley was briefed. Schief saw the reports. They dismissed them. Patton acted on them. That was the difference. Patton trusted his intelligence officer more than he trusted conventional wisdom. Trusted analysis over assumptions, and he had the courage to prepare for something everyone said would not happen. The contingency plans were the key. Without them, turning Third Army would have taken weeks. With them, it took hours. After the war, military historians studied Patton's relief of Bastogne extensively, tried to understand how it was possible. The consensus was clear. It was possible because of preparation, because of planning, because of leadership that trusted good intelligence and acted on it. Not luck, not genius, just preparation meeting opportunity. General Omar Bradley later wrote about Patton's performance, called it magnificent, said George was the man you wanted when the chips were down. General Eisenhower acknowledged Patton's unique value, said he would take one Patton over 3 conventional commanders. The relief of Bastogne vindicated every controversial decision Eisenhower made to keep Patton in command. For Patton himself, Bastogne was proof that his methods worked, that aggressive action created opportunities, that speed mattered more than caution, that asking forgiveness was easier than asking permission. He had violated conventional thinking, prepared for a battle nobody believed would happen, then executed perfectly when it did. Why did Patton order his entire Third Army to change direction overnight? Because he could, because he had prepared, because one intelligence officer was right and everyone else was wrong, because 10,000 paratroopers were surrounded and dying, because the war hung in the balance, and because George Patton never accepted impossible as an answer.